Florida's new Tea Party governor has put out his radical new budget. He unveiled it in a mega church, packed with whooping and hollering Tea Party activists. The whole thing was like a campaign event, complete with thank yous to the Tea Partiers for getting him elected. Oh, well, so much for being governor of everyone. The headline of Scott's budget is that he wants to cut corporate taxes. I mean, really cut them.
We will reduce the business taxes from 5.5% to 3%. Completely. And we will completely phase it out by 2018.
Woohoo! Corporate taxes at zero! Now, it's worth pointing out that when corporations get tax breaks, someone has to pick up the slack. So it's the regular taxpayers who pick up the tab. Honestly, the Republicans have put together a bit of a brilliant strategy. They push to cut corporate taxes. Cutting corporate taxes necessarily puts more of a tax burden on regular citizens. Then those citizens get mad about taxes and vote for conservatives, who then cut corporate taxes. And around we go. This is the Republican 101 strategy. You say one thing, but you mean the exact opposite. For example, Rick Scott is calling his budget, quote, a jobs budget, except that his budget actually cuts 13,000 jobs over 2 years. But it's cool because Scott's promising 700,000 jobs and a pony for everyone sometime in the future, after those wonderful no corporate taxes trickle down to all of you. Rick Scott says the Florida legislature needs to pass his radical budget, quote, for the kids, except that his budget cuts 10% from per student spending. The budget also trims the fat in public safety. It cuts $82 billion from the state's prison system. That sounds disastrous. But the real people who are paying are the very poor. Scott wants to take $3 billion from Medicaid over the next 2 years and reduce the, quote, medically needy program serving the catastrophically sick, as the Miami Herald put it. But taking from the catastrophically sick isn't even the worst thing that Scott's doing. The governor also wants to gut the state's homelessness assistance office and the December 21st observance of Homeless Persons Memorial Day. Look, dude, that's just gratuitous, man. There can't be any clearer example of the hatred of the poor that the Tea Partiers feel. Populist? These guys pretend to be populist? This crowd hates the poor so much that not only do they want to cut help from the homeless, they don't even want to recognize they exist. Look, I just want to ask you this very simple set of questions. What do you think happens when you shut down the Homelessness Assistance Office? Do all the homeless people pack up and move to another state or another country? What do you think happens when you cut jails? Do criminals just commit fewer crimes? What happens when someone who's catastrophically sick is booted from the rolls of the catastrophically sick? Do they get better? No, all these problems then come back to haunt you in much worse ways. The homeless spill into the streets. So do the criminals. So do the sick. Is this the Republican vision for our future? Ironically, they're the ones obsessed with redistribution of wealth, right up to the top. Now, take a look at this. This is Florida's tax rate, one of the most regressive in the country. You're not seeing it wrong. The poorest people pay the most, almost 14%. The richest people pay the least, about 2%. I'm sure a chart in Somalia looks very similar. Look, this Lord of the Flies type of barbarism, where you rob the poor to pay the rich, has to have a limit. And if it does, we're apparently going to find that limit in Florida. Joining me now is former Pennsylvania Governor Ed Rendell. He's now an NBC News political analyst. So, is there a limit? I mean, if he does this, do the voters of Florida at some point wake up and go, my God, what have we done?
Sure. You know, the interesting thing about cutting the budget as the answer to all problems, the interesting thing is when you poll it, people are all in favor of reducing government spending. But then when you get specific, all of a sudden it isn't so hot anymore. You know, people are specifically against cuts to this, cuts to that. We had a demonstration for education when I was governor and trying to increase education spending in the midst of the recession. And a woman had a poster and it said, I didn't know cutting the budget meant firing my child's teacher. And when it gets personal, when it's an older person you know, when it's a criminal who's committed a crime against your family that gets released from prison, those things stir people up. When the income gap, the people of this country have been very, very passive about the widening of the gap in income. But eventually, we're going to reach the breaking point. And I think it's not just Florida. In other states, when we're trying to balance budget on the backs of people who really have legitimate needs. And by the way, it's not just the poor anymore. Cenk, do you know, I'll just ask you a question, a rhetorical question. How many Pennsylvanians out of 12.5 million get food stamps?
That's an excellent question. I think I might have actually once known the answer, but go ahead. How much is it?
It's 1.2 million. So 1 out of 12 Pennsylvanians gets food stamps. 10 years ago, people would have said food stamps is just for the very, very poor. It isn't anymore. These programs affect and help everybody. Cut programs for autism, and you're cutting into the heart of middle-class families trying desperately to pay for the services that their kids need. So this is not just an assault against the poor. It's really going to be an assault against virtually everyone in society. And there has to come a point where it breaks the tolerance of the public. And look, understand that governors, both Republican and Democrats alike, in 08, 09 and 2010, we all made difficult cuts. I cut $3.5 billion out of the Pennsylvania budget. I closed down 160 out of 780 budget lines, meaning those programs were closed down. So a lot of the cuts have already been made. If there are more cuts, and there have to be more cuts, but if they're reckless cuts, it's going to create an incredible social imbalance, and I think it's going to create real unrest.
And it's not just in Florida, it's all throughout the country. I want to go to Scott Walker next. He's another Republican governor. This is what he said when we were talking about public employees. Let's watch.
We can no longer live in a society where the public employees are the haves and the taxpayers who foot the bills are the have-nots.
This is another line of attack. They say federal employees, unions, Chris Christie's doing it in New Jersey. You see Scott Walker all across saying, oh, no, it's not that we cut the corporate taxes, not we cut the taxes for the rich. It's the unions and the laborers and the workers that are the problem.
Well, first of all, this idea of demonizing government workers is silly. Government workers do not, by and large, get good, rich salaries. They get average salaries. Their benefit package is a little better, and there has to be changes in the benefits to make them more realistic. I, a Democratic governor, a proud progressive, I came in and made our employees contribute to their health care costs for the first time. But that's because every citizen does. And changes have to be made and should be made. But this idea that there are government employees living off the fat of the land, making super salaries, that's crazy. And by the way, you can cut government employees left and right, and it's not going to solve the depth of the budget problems we have. So we should stop scapegoating teachers. You can be mad at teachers' unions. You can be mad at municipal and state unions. I'm not sure that's fair, but don't be mad at the individuals. They're hardworking people, just like people who work in the private sector. And they have families and children to support, and they take care of their parents, just like people in the private sector.
All right, Governor Ed Rendell, thank you so much for your time tonight.
Thanks, Cenk.